All right, everybody. Thank you so much for attending IDSA Seattle's user experience panel. Um, Today we'll be talking to three designers who have a formal education in industrial design, but they currently practice user experience. So the topics that will be covered today will be a range of things from what is UX to what are some of the trends that we're seeing, and how does someone transition into UX design. So to kick things off, I'd like to introduce our three panelists. First is Alex, who designs products in the healthcare space, Senna, who designs professional tools, and Patrick, who designs consumer electronics. So thank you to the three of you for being part of this panel. We're really excited to have you here. And as kind of a note to everyone who's attending today, if you have any questions or comments or things you want to say, we also welcome you to either hop off mute and say something or just type in the chat and we'll either ask your question or try and catch your comments. So feel free to join in on the conversation if you'd like. So let's kick things off here by having the panelists tell us a little bit about themselves. So first one, oops, is Alex.
Hey everybody. Thanks for having us, and thanks for the intro there, Scott. So my name's Alex Diener. I work at Dexcom, which is a device, a system, an ecosystem to help people manage their diabetes. The senior director of global product design there. Worked here for 3 years. And before that, worked at Pensar in downtown Seattle for 10 years. And a brief stint at Zeba in between starting my career at Sonosite, which I was there for 6 years, doing mobile ultrasound and imaging ultrasound for a variety of applications. Grew up in Seattle and went to school at Western. And I think in my mid-20s, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, which was kind of a formative moment for me, in terms of being in the healthcare design space. And, it took me, I guess, probably another 10 years to really decide that diabetes technology was the area that I wanted to focus and where I wanted to contribute. And that kind of led me to Dexcom, and that's where I am today. So I'm happy to pass the mic to the next person.
Awesome, thank you, Alex.
Hey, my name is Senna Janke, and similar to Alex, I studied at Western in the industrial design program there. From there, I actually moved to Utah and designed treadmills for a couple of years, and then moved back and started my career at flUX, and was at flUX for 16 years, and then left there to go. I was at Milwaukee briefly, and then Physio Control, which is now Stryker, and that kind of started a 7-year career in the medical space. So because I was at Stryker for 3.5 years, and then I started my own consulting business, and most of my clients there were in the medical space. And then just in October, I was fortunate enough to rejoin flUX. Super happy to be back. Excited about all the opportunities that they're doing there. I started out doing industrial design, and then have done over the, probably about 20 years ago, started working with, some of you may know Joseph Ferrante, who is the user interaction designer at flUX. And then just started doing more and more interaction design. And then when I left flUX, was fully interaction design, and then have been going more and more to the web application space. But always, I guess I will save the rest of it for the panel. So anyway, there's a little intro. So on
cool.
to, yeah.
Thank you, Senna.
Yeah.
All right, Patrick.
Hey everybody, happy to be here. My name is Patrick Fiore. So I got my start back in Indiana. I went to Purdue University for industrial design and then did my graduate degree in interaction design. And came out here to California to get things started. Went to work at Samsung Electronics. So designing things like smart TVs, smart refrigerators, so you can gather around like your family and all stare at the screen on your refrigerator all at once if you want to. And then from there, moved up to Seattle, which is where I met Scott, and worked at Amazon designing mostly electronics like the Echo Show, the Echo Auto, different embodiments of the Echo devices, Echo Kids, Fire TV Q, which was an interesting experience. And from there, went to Facebook for a little while, and now I'm at Roku. We're working primarily on TVs that are manufactured with different partners like Sharp or TCL with the Roku operating system as their OS, and different live TV offerings and things like that.
Right. Yeah, thank you again to you three for joining us today. It's very diverse, so this should be very interesting. So yeah, before we start with questions, we have a little bit of an icebreaker. So Kate, you want to lead us through this?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's great to have that background on all of you, Alex, Senna, and Pat. But we really do want to involve the audience. So to start off the question time, we're inviting anybody that's here to turn on their mic and camera if you're comfortable, or to put in the chat this first question we want to talk about, which is what is ID to you and what is UX to you? Who's feeling brave? Take it away.
I'll jump in. I think just at a fundamental level, I would draw the line between industrial design as the three-dimensional form factor and UI design as the 2D functional factor. There's a little bit of overlap between the areas of back, probably old school UI was pretty simple in terms of buttons and knobs and displays, but now has created its own world in terms of applications and desktops. But that's just my elevator pitch view of it.
Right. Where does UX come into play with that, Wayne?
So that I think probably just from a kind of stereotype point of view, I'd put UX more in the UI experience side of things in terms of how the information is presented. I think though, if you step back, the user experience part of it also gets heavy into the ID and really starts to deal with a lot of things that are made less tangible. You know, how a door sounds when it closes, how a button feels when you push it, a rotary knob. Just the way something feels, the heft of it is probably part of that user experience that is probably a lot of it's intuitive. And then when you kind of see it explained in front of you, it's like an aha. Well, of course, that's why that's better. You know, it feels better, it looks better, it sounds better.
I like that phrase, the heft of it. I'm going to use that. We got a couple answers in the chat. So from Elise, she says, I describe ID to people as if engineering and design had a baby. It utilizes form and function to tell the stories of end users and better help their lives. And then from Parker, ID is the body and UX is the soul. It's an interesting take. Elise, do you?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I really feel like, you know, UX is sort of that dark matter. You can't quite, you know, personify it or perceive it, but it's all the things that blend the ID and the UI together, right? Just like, you know, Wayne was mentioning, the weight of the knob, you know, the feel, the interface between how the physical and the digital react together. You can't quite always quantify it, but it surrounds all these products in every way.
one of one of the things that when talking with engineering, if there's like a senior engineer, I often say, like, industrial design hands off to a mechanical engineer, user interaction hands off to a software engineer, as far as a deliverable goes. But the user experience is part of the whole package, because understanding that empathy and understanding what the users, what their jobs are, what they're trying to do, it drives both the hardware and the software. So if I think of it as like a big circle user experience and then two circles inside of it, one of them, can be industrial design, one of them can be interaction design. Because then there's lots of other pieces that you can add on to those, like sound design and human ergonomics and human factors and all these other sub kind of studies. And it really depends on the size of the company as well, because sometimes you have industrial designers that are doing all of that. At least that's my experience has been that's typically in the past, a lot of that. But now in the last 15 years, since software has become so prevalent and the UX kind of as a profession has developed, there's more need to kind of talk about what people are doing in those fields.
Yeah, that's a really good response. Senna, Alex, or Patrick, do you have any thoughts here?
Yeah, I like thinking about the. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Alex.
No, go for it, Patrick.
Yeah, I like. I think a lot of people think about it, the Venn diagram, like Shauna was saying, or seeing where the two overlap. And I think it might be a little bit academic, but I always think about the terminology. Industrial design, user experience design, and really, like in my mind, there are two circles that are completely overlapping, and really just one circle. Because when I think about industrial design, after practicing both, it's just any design that we can create and deliver to users on a mass scale, mass productionable design. And to do that, generally you have to do the hardware, and then you have to have the accompanying software to go with it to make it meaningful for people. But then when you think about user experience design, I mean, that's everything. That's pretty blanket term. It's anybody who's interacting with your design, period, your hardware, your software, and not even tangibly. The first time a user really interacts with a piece of hardware, they're looking at it. They're looking to see where they should grab it, how it should be handled, what it looks like. So I think at this point it's mostly academic the way we categorize, and I think recruiters and people that are hiring for jobs need titles to put on jobs and put people into certain places. But I think it's just become more and more ambiguous. Like my role right now is product designer, and it's rather vague, even though I only do mostly interaction design and UI design at this point. But I think in the future we'll even start to see more of a convergence. Like it used to be, very similar when we used to actually create, physical inputs like keyboards and things that maybe you would bring in an industrial designer with more of a interaction design specialty to kind of blend the two. And I think we're going to start to see that coming back together on the other side here, where we start to move towards mostly augmented reality. And the interfaces that most people are designing right now in Sketch or Figma that are, largely 2D are going to become 3D. And then these CAD skills are going to kind of come back around, where if you're making a button, you can't just map it out, you got to model it out and model the physics. And I think we're going to see a reblending of industrial design and what we call today user experience design.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome summary, and the word that resonated for me in that kind of discussion was convergence. It does feel like we're at like another moment. There was a divergence there for a while, like iPhone comes out in 2007, smartphones come out, iPad comes out in 2010, and also with like the advent of the web and search engines, right? There's divergence. And now it's like all kind of coming back around again. But I think if you take a look at the definition of user experience, like it's pretty expansive, right? And again, if you go out there and try to do some research, like pin it down, the more you try to pin it down, the more it tries to like kind of slip away. But thoughts, feelings, sensations, around a tool or environment, right? All of that is kind of like feeding into that that role of user experience. And at Dexcom, you know, like whether it's wearing a body worn sensor or displaying the data or making the meaning of the data or trying to get an alert for somebody, you know, like signal them with a high or low glucose, all of that is falling under kind of like the user experience umbrella. So it's pretty, as Spencer said, you know, it's kind of like all the things, right? All the things coming together, all those different facets as part of the same whole.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that you've all said, oh, well, this is like, some of it is like an academic definition, and I like Senna's kind of similarly on how she would kind of explain it. But something that was mentioned is like UI, you know, so I think we just talked about the definition of UX. Maybe we can talk a little bit more about what is a UI and what makes it successful, right? Because we talked about maybe an environment could be a UI, right? So tell us a little bit more about what your definition around that is.
I think UI is just a very specific piece of you know, overall product design. It's, I think, you know, it could be akin to your CMF person if you're an ID. Generally, I think I would refer to it more as just visual design, just specifically working on visual fidelity and things like that. I don't know, there used to be a pretty strict practice of separating interaction design and visual design, where you would have your interaction designer doing strictly wireframes, and then the visual designer would come by and do a pass on it or a few passes to make it look good. You've seen kind of a convergence of that, again, using our buzzword. Yeah, so I think it's yeah, user interface. Again, like it's to be like academic with it, like anything is a user interface, you know, like the keyboard is technically like a great user interface that's tangible. So I think, yeah, it just refers to a very specific part of the design. And it's definitely not the whole field of UX, because there's so much more that goes into getting a product to market, as everyone on this call knows, than the portion where the user has to actually interface with your product or interact with it. There's tons behind the scenes that the user will never know. Then they'll say, oh, why did they do it like this? This is horrible. And then if they actually knew the reason, that it was thermal limitations, or we couldn't get this contract with Netflix and this, that, and the other. There's just so much that goes into the supply chain of intellectual property to get something out the door to users beyond just a UI.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think if we had to explain that, you might end up writing a nice novel that goes with the product. So nice, Patrick. Senna or Alex, do you have any?
Yeah, I think of it a little differently. I guess I think of the user interaction more as that wireframing and really focusing on working out the bugs of what are these users trying to do, if you will, and then definitely like visual design is an aspect, but I always think of applying visual design to the established, like when I make a prototype, I start, like either it's monochromatic, just like getting stuff out, ideally, and then applying visual design at a later stage where you're needing to highlight, call to actions on the software. But it is all tied together. So in my head, I default to kind of thinking about user interaction as more wireframes, because also, depending on what your deliverable is to like the software team, like sometimes you can just give them a wireframe. This is how I want it to interact, and they already understand like what styles to apply to that, because there's already like maybe a style guide in place. You just need to show them what the interaction is if it's already in place. Sometimes you have to deliver everything. It just kind of depends on the fidelity of the team.
There's so much like difference in like definition, like group to group, between consultancy or even within corporations, right? Corporation. UI at Dexcom is a user interface, right? So we're really thinking more about the visual layer, and we have both UX job titles and we have UI job titles. There's a couple different reasons for that, but like at the end of the day, you know, the UX designers are responsible for that information architecture and the flow, and the UI designers are more responsible for the visual layer, making sure it's intuitive, making sure it's conveying the right information, not just in terms of like the nuts and bolts of the experience, but also, you know, creating joy, creating a brand moment, that type of thing. But we also really like strongly encourage like people to not be in their swim lane. Like, sure, like instead of like, okay, there's swim lanes, right? And they're hard definitions. It's more like we're all in the same pool together, right? And so like, we're swimming along each other, but crossover is critical. And so, you know, again, like that UI designer might have great information architecture design. And so that role or gathering those ideas should be encouraged, right? So it's not like a hard and fast thing. But yeah,
I think that's even more 100% agreed. And I think every company does it slightly different and has those different definitions, which is why if you're looking for a job or if you're looking to find out, like it's super important to, apply, go through the interview process, understand, because oftentimes I've seen where, depending on the size of the company or the recruiter, they don't know what they're asking either. So like, it's not until, like the interview process where you're like, oh, you guys are actually need someone, at a higher level that's going through and designing like a strategy for someone, like an overall experience, or, oh no, you guys just need someone to come in and execute this, like take that vision and then like apply it. And those can be different things depending on the company. And so there's a lot of interchangeability. It is, I think it is tricky to navigate. I think if you're not in the field, like people outside are like, I just don't know,
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think there's a lot of definitions and a lot of interpretations, right? I think maybe that's kind of where things get mixed up. Maybe before we move on to kind of talking about trends, maybe could you guys tell us a little bit about, like, how would you explain this to someone who's maybe not in design or maybe not so ingrained in what we do on a daily basis?
So I usually just provide an example. And so one example that a lot of people can at least imagine is when I was at Stryker or Physio Control, it was like, I design a portable defibrillator. These are the boxes that the EMTs carry with them. And what I put on the screen, I'm trying to like minimize their decision making so that they can get and solve problems as quickly as possible. Like, reduce cognitive load so that they can do their job. And most people can kind of relate to a scenario like that and understand that I'm trying to simplify that that user, that job, that, trying to make it easier for someone.
I think
Gotcha.
I think everybody here, all these designers on this call, like at some point you're a design diplomat, right? You are educating either your organization or your clients about the difference. And I think the biggest suggestion I have, no matter what definition you land on, is try to eliminate the jargon as much as possible. Like we always talk about, like at Dexcom, avoid inside baseball talk. Like because so many times like we're kind of drinking our designer Kool-Aid, and then when we go to like talk to the clients or educate the organization, it's just too much all at once, right? So really trying to like boil it down to its essential. And like I said, your definition of what that is at your organization is going to be different. So just try to get to the essence of like what is the most understandable.
Yeah, I usually the conversations are from family members or something like that, where they're coming in and they say, "Oh, you make things look good, right?" They basically think it's graphic design. And then you could be like Steve Jobs and say it's not how things look, it's how things work. But it's not even really how things work. It's the whole product. It's what the product is. So like an easy way to think about it is the like echo stuff, like where there is no how it looks for the interaction designer, that it's all on the ID. But there's a lot about how it works, from, you know, coming up with the primary use cases, and then, oh, we need to put this little light ring on it to have some form of indication to the user that it's listening, things like that. I think the most interesting projects and the way to help people understand the industry is the ones that go from 0 to 1, where there is no, you know, you're not coming up with the next generation of Roku TV or something. You're coming up with the first generation of, you know, whatever the iPad is or the Echo is or something like that. And that's easier for people to kind of grok. And because at that point, you can kind of think of an industrial designer, an interaction designer, a visual designer, a voice designer, a CMF person, all together in a room, starting at 0 and saying, this is what we think we can do, and going from there. Because it's not really as waterfall as people think it is, or as it appears to be as you move down the manufacturing process and things start to separate.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that was all really interesting. And I just like maybe a follow-up. We have a question from Colleen that says, as we talk about the difficulties labeling these roles for hiring managers during this time of convergence, what advice would you have to deal with the ambiguity as someone who is looking for work? So how do you sell your skill set when there aren't agreed upon terms throughout the industry?
Don't talk about your job title. Talk about what you're going to do for them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
talk about process. And it kind of comes down to design thinking, like what's your, you know, like what is the problem that you're trying to solve, and whether you're an industrial designer or UX designer or interaction designer, if you can talk about, because it's all the same process, like what's the problem I'm trying to solve, then, and you know, that's being able to communicate that is key.
So much of the job for any of these is being, you know, like kind of a PM, and like selling, pitching, like making a million meetings, compromises between two people who don't like each other. So I think, I don't know, like I think when you see somebody's portfolio, like after you've seen about 1,000, you can tell within, you know, about 2 minutes, like what this person's about. Because especially for if you're interviewing for digital product design, a portfolio is a little digital product that they're putting together by themselves. So it's really easy to look at that and get a sense. And then you can see the content that they put inside it and be like, oh, there's a lot of disparity between this content. Like, who really made this content? Because it doesn't look like the same person that made this presentation here. But yeah, I would just say just focus on your skills. Like, you know, talk through problems that you've tackled, like show your best work, show stuff you're proud of. You should always just try to get your portfolio, your presentations to a place where you've worked on them enough that you're excited to show them. If you're going in and you're nervous about it because you're not feeling confident about your portfolio, you should go back and work on your portfolio more and get more stuff in there. And it's hard for that first job. So you just got to be scrappy, you know, be a contractor, be an intern, get one really good one under your belt, and then go from there.
And everybody, regardless of your skill level, has a superpower. Like, even if you've got 0 years experience right out of school, like you have a, you know, everybody has like 2 or 3 superpowers, like things that they're really good at. Start with that. And you know what? You don't have to be all things. You just don't have to be all things, you know, just be like, hey, you know, unicorns don't exist. And sure, there are some hiring managers who are looking for those unicorns. They're going to look for a long time. Focus on those skills that are true to you, that are really, really robust. And for stuff that you've got to grow on, just call it as such, you know, like, hey, I'm working on these skills, but you know, this is what I can bring to the table today, and leave it there.
Nice. Oh, go ahead, Senna.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. Like, so another like an example of this is like, it's totally not flashy or pretty, but I totally have a section in my portfolio where I talk about like processes and personas and journey maps. And I have this one huge lucid chart map where it looks like a big rat's nest because I connected, and it visually shows like why there was a problem when I was a consultant. Like, this is what I was trying to untangle. And this visually shows like where there were, why decisions weren't being made. And, so sometimes it's like what you're talking about in your interviews aren't even design related, but it's the fact that you're communicating a process and that you understand that you need to advocate for design, and you're trying to untangle these things because in order to do your design work, you need to understand how these things work.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, some really good advice. So thank you. Let's move on to kind of our next section, which I'll hand over to Kate, and we'll talk a little bit about trends and what's changed. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. I think something kind of fun to kick it off is just what are some of the most surprising or exciting changes that you've seen emerge in UX and ID respectively over your career? Maybe Senna, you can start us off.
Well, I think the most exciting thing for me is just the fact that I've been able to grow. So like, I was an industrial designer, and I loved my job. I liked flUX, but I needed more, and going into interaction design and UX allowed me to just grow professionally and stay in the same location, stay at the same company. And that was really exciting for me, and it worked. It was provided just a great challenge for me. So I appreciated the ability to grow professionally from that standpoint.
Absolutely. Yeah, Alex or Patrick, do either of you want to add on to that?
I think just like, when I graduated, dating myself here, I graduated in 2000, and like, there was kind of like, again, there was divergence happening then. Like, either you went the traditional hardware route, or you went UX. And if you were doing UX UI, that meant that you were working on websites. Like, we had a lot of industrial designers go to Expedia, go to Microsoft, or maybe they were working on firmware interfaces like Xbox interface, that type of thing, right? And so it was like, it was kind of a very, it was a fork in the road. As I mentioned earlier, 2007, you get the iPhone, and so it's a bridge device. It's a physical object that is with you all the time. And so you're marrying that physical object with the digital experience, and maybe that's working with other kind of things in the ecosystem, right? Whether it's paying for parking or a recipe or another device. So just seeing that ability where, again, like it diverged and then it converged again, so that all of those skills could come to play, and you could leverage that background in industrial design in the UX UI work more and more increasingly, because it's all playing together.
One of the best trends I've seen at larger companies is the ability for ground level ICs, of any level, to be able to develop a point of view or a product or an idea, and just kind of shop that up through the chain. And retain ownership, and how that's encouraged. I've seen junior level designers create an idea, start to flesh it out, start to garner support, and present it all the way up to CEOs and presidents of companies, and get that kind of recognition. So I think it's really great that these companies are starting just to really value investing in design organizations, and creating the steering committee and the leadership teams to really put a lot of emphasis on that, and encourage people to be independent. And
Yeah, I really appreciate thinking about it more, and just the way that we all are relating to these fields shifting. That's kind of the biggest change that I think all of you just touched on. Have there been any like really pivotal pieces of technology that you just think have made a radical change in the way that you approach your day-to-day work? Maybe who wants to kick that one off? Alex, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of is springboarding off like where that last question went for me. Like, you know, again, that having just all this computing power that's like ubiquitous now. You know, it used to be in the past that computing power was sparse. Now it's abundant, and you know, I mean, it's crazy. So, you know, I'll give you an example here. You know, like this is the body worn Dexcom sensor, and pretty soon this will be communicating, you know, directly to, you know, an Apple Watch. It's already communicating to an Apple Watch through through the phone itself, but you know, these direct connections are being created, and it's just opening up entirely new experiences. So, you know, that's kind of the big sea change moment for me.
I would say, honestly, just like all the development in, I mean, like touch screens first, like that was just going from, you know, buttons and dials to direct manipulation was huge. And that kind of what started that, I think Alex pointed to, is like the iPhone. Because then what happened is now it's just the change cycles are just happening so much more quickly, and the expectations, because now all these people have these supercomputer smartphones in their pockets, and they are no longer, even though like in the industrial and medical space, we have totally different constraints than a consumer product, but the expectation and now having to manage, like they have all these things that they're interacting with, you know, thousands of times a day, these smartphones, and they expect their everything else to kind of be similar. And so just even though that's not a tool that directly relates to my job, it definitely affects my job because it affects everyone's expectations and has driven dramatic change. And I think, yeah, it's just been interesting to see how rapidly that has happened, and it will continue to happen. It used to be the design cycles were much longer, I think, and now there's just no acceptance for that, you know, for that. It's like we need to compete at this level.
Yeah, I would say just advances in back-end engineering and just data science, data collection, for better or for worse. But for better, like for instance, like Netflix just implementing like top 10 shows, like such a simple, you know, data set to conceive, but it just adds such an interesting layer to a product. You know, if you work in consumer like you or TV, you've probably gone to sprints and drawn, you know, watch party like 1,000 times, and it just always ends up on the cutting room floor, and you're always like, we should, you know, why doesn't somebody do this? And it's just because the back end was too hard. You know, it's just too difficult to actually have that stuff come to fruition. So now we're getting to an inflection point where we're actually able to do some of these things, you know, where you can have watch parties pretty seamlessly on like Peacock, or you can do these top 10 lists. You know, you could be prompted to share your Wi-Fi password like automatically, like on your Apple phone, things like that. So just all these delightful experiences that, you know, have been thought about, you know, a billion times are finally able to be executed and built on. So I think that's exciting for the field.
Yeah, that's really incredible. I mean, this next question it's kind of funny because I think when you talk about this field at all, it's nearly impossible not to just start talking about the future, right? It's kind of why we all love it and why we get excited. But I'm curious where each one of you sees the future of, you know, ID and UX merging. And I guess since we already talked about where it's headed in the next couple of years, maybe push your answers out to a more extreme, you know, you can answer like 5 years, but then also where do you really see it in 15 or beyond that, if you'd like. Pat, do you want to start?
Yeah. No, I've always thought this was funny. It's evident when you watch movies, and they're older movies, you know, a couple of decades old, because nothing looks different. You're like, oh, when was this shot? And then they pull out their phone, and you're like, oh, it's a couple of decades old. It's the only technology is like the only benchmark where you can really differentiate, like, you know, tables, chairs, like all this stuff like doesn't change too much. So it's going to be interesting to see that continue to reduce as we move forward, you know. Hopefully, as we move towards, again, like this kind of augmented reality future, we won't need, you know, things like TVs like on your wall that are just black squares when they're off, or, you know, keyboards that, you know, sit on your desk taking up space. Like these bespoke pieces of hardware to either display interfaces or interact with interfaces of different kinds. I think there's going to be, you know, a reduction back to, you know, just the regular stuff, just tables, chairs. You know, to a point, cars will still be around, but we'll probably all won't have one. You know, it'll be shared and stuff like that. So I think, again, that'll be an interesting trend. And then just the convergence of ID and UI and getting back to, because there'll probably be more CAD modeling, like fewer things, but more models out there, you know, more nerves, you know, in the ether that we can interact with in different ways. And, you know, should be exciting. Should be, you know, I'd imagine we'd be, you know, modeling like, you know, HoloLens style, things like that. So yeah, should be good.
Alex, I feel like I saw you get ready to talk when he said NURBS in the ether.
NURBS, yeah, I always want to talk about NURBS. It's top. No, but yeah, I mean, I kind of, you know, we touched on the buzzword convergence. Yeah, I think our fields are going to become more and more closely intertwined. You know, I like, you know, what Pat, you said earlier about like, hey, you know, there's UX, UI, but then there's also the job title of just product designer, like just product designer. And, you know, we've certainly had those conversations on our team for sure. But yeah, I mean, we're solving the needs of people through a variety of medium. The goals are the same. You know, the process is very similar. The tools by which to achieve those designs are different. And certainly, you know, there's 10,000 hours in the seat to be really good at, you know, physical object design. There's 10,000 hours in the seat to be really, really awesome at designing on a variety of mediums, whether it be, you know, screen, the visual layer, or the information architecture. So there, you know, obviously there will be some level of specialization, but, you know, to kind of pick up on one of the questions in the chat from Joshua, is there a benefit for ID to learn UI and UX? Yeah, I mean, you're going to have to be, as this convergence happens, you're going to have to be able to speak the language, right? You're going to have to be fluent in all those different languages of design. And so that's kind of where I see it continuing to go.
I don't really have anything extra to add because I agree with everything that is already said. I do agree. It's just everything's going to just start coming together, and there will, and similar to today, like it will depend on like how big your company is, depending on what you specialize in. Like some companies today have industrial designers, they have visual designers, they have UX designers, and those people have these really small things. If you work at a smaller company, you're doing all of that. So I think that just being I don't think that's going away. You know, but what the cars look like and you know, all the machine learning that is happening from all the data that we're putting out to all the devices that we're using, we're just going to be leveraging that more and more and more moving forward.
Absolutely. Well, with that, Scott, I'll kick it back to you to talk about how people can get into UX now that we're all so excited about it.
Yeah. So NURBS will be our next talk next week, same time. So yeah, so wow, time has also really flown by. So you know, let's end kind of this part before we move into any question and answer with, you know, how do people get into UX or UI, or how do you transition? Should people transition through work? Should people transition by going to school? Yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
So I'm just gonna start, because I talked a little bit about it earlier. So I was really lucky in the fact that I was able to transition in my job. And I tend to think that I'm completely biased, but I tend to think that that's a great way to do it if you have the opportunity, because I do have friends that have started doing like UX or UI work, and they really miss the three-dimensional part of it. And they end up they ended up going and studying maybe a certificate program, and then so they do have that knowledge, they just didn't practice it. Now, I don't think they would, I don't think that they think that that's a waste of time. It was still valuable knowledge, I should say. But just kind of pointing that out.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's
Nice.
so
Yeah.
it's so person dependent, right? Like that transition, because some people are very well equipped coming, based on wherever they're at in their life, be it their professional life or their academic life, to jump into one or the other. It really depends on kind of like your base skill set. And this is kind of like building off of Senna's answer. Does that job allow you the space you need to learn? Because many times, like, either it's a high pressure environment, whether it be corporate or consultancy, where you're expected to like knock things out like fast and you have to be proficient. And then there's jobs that are like, hey, like it is not a super high pressure environment, or you're doing this on the side, so we expect you to come up the curve. They'll give you more time and space and oxygen to develop your skill set. So you have to be realistic about that, of like, what do I want to jump into and how high pressure is it? How sharp are my skills going to have to be? And then you can decide what's the right path.
Yep. I would say I would be wary of trying to build up a portfolio yourself of self-directed projects to try to get into user experience design, or to try to get a job doing user experience design. Just because you can just tell, not that they're bad, but you can just tell right away. It's like anytime you watch a movie and they have a user interface in the movie, even like these incredibly talented visual effects artists, even Iron Man UI, like when you look at it, you're like, it's not right. Like it doesn't feel right because it hasn't been through the rigor of actually being developed as a product. And you feel that right away when you look at somebody's portfolio who's just trying to build up a body of work by themselves, creating an app or something, which is great, but you're not going to have the skills that you need to succeed in the job. So instead of doing that, find yourself a place where you can work on an actual project that people are actually going to use, that somebody's actually got to build, whether or not you're doing it for free for somebody like at your college or something like that. I think, yeah, you need to be somewhere where it's actually getting produced. It's being built by an engineer. It's getting used by somebody. You're changing it. You're going back. Focus on doing that instead of trying to do 3 projects that you're doing yourself that you think will be interesting or cool. Even if the app that you're doing or whatever isn't that interesting of a premise, if it's real, it's going to be so much more valuable, and it's going to give you so much more credibility when you try to get that actual job.
Yeah. Nice. Really good insights. So thank you.
I
Yeah,
was
go
going
ahead.
to throw a wrench into the conversation. So the other thing to note that we haven't really talked about is there's another field called UX research. And I just think it's worthy. Sorry, my dog is sleeping. I don't know if you can hear him, but he's barking. He's barking in his dreams. So I just wanted to point out that like UX research is also a really interesting field. There is depending on what you are leaning toward or what pieces of UX you like, going and getting quantitative or qualitative data, doing ethnographic work. Some of those kind of just blend into this field as well. So I just kind of wanted to put a note out there too, because I think that can be I have friends that have gone into research from industrial design as well.
Yes, research. Yes, it's always super fun because you get to go like meet people and talk to people. So yeah, really, really cool. And I hope your dog is dreaming about good biscuit UX or something like that.
I tried to wake him up, but honestly, he's like in such a deep sleep right now.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
sorry, side note.
No, it's all good. Yeah, so we've got a few minutes left here. Does anyone have any questions or anything they want to add to any of these topics or something we haven't talked about?
Yeah, I just had I had a fun thought thinking about after everything all three of you said, which amazing information, and like convergence. And so I was trying to think like what would make a really good UX designer. And I'm feeling like it's almost like you have to be an extremely empathetic person too, to like truly kind of put yourself in the shoes of someone else, right? And so it's like I was trying to think who would be a good source of people to try and like tap into, like if you're testing something. So it's like I wonder if you could, you know, reach out to a bunch of like counselors or therapists or something like that to be like, hey, like I'm workshopping this app, you know, that deals with such and such. Could you like take a look at it and let me know what you think? Because I would imagine, you know, they would be super empathetic. Or you make the leap from UX, UI to being like a counselor or something like that. Maybe that's something we all could do. Anyway, that was just a thought that I had as you guys were speaking.
Yeah, I mean, empathy plus, you know, like attention to detail and structure. I mean, I find like having that human component, interest in helping people or solving their problems is like kind of like, you know, that's the foundational element. And then on top of that, like just willing to get into the details, because that's where the separation between like good and great design is, like resolving all those nagging issues that everybody else wants to ignore, but only you or a handful of you are willing to invest the time to resolve.
Yeah, and like the patience to get into that too, right? And so I guess, yeah, I wonder from your end, has there been? It could be every project or something, like, because I know there's deadlines too. So like, at what point, you know, if you're designing a piece of something where you're just like, that's good enough, or like it has to be good enough because we have to hit, you know, this deadline or something like that.
You get that a lot. And the people who are paying for it to be produced, their good enough is probably down here, and your good enough is probably, you know, way up here. So you're probably not going to be pleased, you know, with your good enough that's going out to live. But they'll tell you that they'll make good enough better in the future. So it's important to keep reminding them about that. But
Gotcha.
yeah, it's constant trade-offs.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Business decisions versus design, you know, processes, always a struggle.
Really what makes a good designer, one thing that makes a good designer in my book is just being very analytical in a debate about trade-offs with somebody, making a decision about why something should be a certain way and articulating the pros and cons in a very mathematic fashion so that the choice is obvious. Because ultimately people are in a company are just accountable to other people, and they need to explain why you chose to do something. And you know, whether or not it's true or you really believe it, like you got to give them an answer that is grounded in some kind of truth. So being able to come up with that, articulate it, and then sell it is important to get things done.
Well, we just really want to thank everybody so much. This has been super informative, and I think we're lucky to have had people that are so deeply knowledgeable about it, but also in three like fairly different corners of this world. I definitely learned a lot. We wanted to mention that we do have a couple events that you guys can look to as well coming up. So we have one on the 21st. It's going to be a Women in Design event, and focused on how to design for climate change, and be smart about that. And then of course the Women in Design deep dive is coming up on July 28th and 29th. So yeah, Scott, do you want to close out?
Yeah, sure. So thank you, Alex, Senna, and Patrick again for joining us and giving us some really good insights and information. Lots to think about. Thank you so much, everyone else, for joining, and I hope you enjoyed it, and we hope to see you at another event.